In Britain today, we're facing the biggest cuts to public services since at least the 1920s. Access to higher education is becoming more and more restricted to those from wealthy backgrounds, with £9,000 tuition fees and scrapping of EMA. We're seeing more and more public services being handed over to private businesses that run for profit. We're seeing funding to NHS services being cut. We're seeing people having to work longer, pay more, and get less from their pensions. And we're also seeing huge unemployment figures that continue to rise. 2.5 million unemployed, 1 million of those being young people who are increasingly finding fewer and fewer options available to them.
And we believe that these cuts are absolutely unnecessary. They are being driven through for ideological reasons, and they don't need to happen.
So in response to the enormous cuts planned by the Tory Liberal coalition government, various trade unions and community groups and campaigns came together a couple of years ago to form the Brighton Stop the Cuts coalition, which is a group that opposes all cuts and organises action in Brighton locally. And the Socialist Party really has been at the heart of helping to organise that. The group includes groups fighting back against cuts to benefits, to housing, to the NHS, to our schools, to our universities, to our hospitals, etc. And has organised some really successful demonstrations. Last year we had 2,000 people march against the spending review when the initial cuts were announced. We've had thousands of students walk out of their colleges and schools. Here at Pavilion Parade we had a two-week occupation during the student movement against the plan to raise fees. This has been in the context of hundreds of thousands of people worldwide fighting back against the cost of the economic crisis being forced onto the shoulders of working and poor people. We've seen thousands of people in the United States, from Wisconsin to New York, protesting against the greed of Wall Street, clearly aimed at the banks and those who caused the economic crisis. We've seen dictatorships toppled in the Middle East, in Egypt and Tunisia, and now thousands of people all across Europe are joining the fight against austerity.
One of the absolute core parts of the fight back is going to be the organised labour movement, the trade unions. And they've already started to move. And when the trade union moves, it really does make a difference. It really is the trade unions that can scare this government. We've seen 500,000 plus marching back in March. After that was followed by a massive strike by education and civil service unions. In Brighton, 4,000 marched, probably the biggest march for the size of the city in the country. And the Trades Council and Socialist Party activists were really core to organising that. Now we have the prospect of a huge public sector general strike in 2 weeks' time. Where I'm standing now in Victoria Gardens, we're expecting 10,000 local trade unionists to come up to show their anger at what the government is doing to their pensions. At every stage, the Socialist Party has taken the tactics of the trade union movement extremely seriously. We've lobbied through the Shop Stewards Network, the TUC, to call a march in the first place, and then pushed as hard as we can for a one-day public sector general strike. It now looks like that's going to happen. We need to be getting out there, we need to be making the arguments about pensions and how it's linked to cuts, how it's linked to privatisation, that there is no reason why public sector workers should have to work longer, pay more and get less. But also we need to see where we're going from here. It's very, very important that we use this huge strike to rebuild the strength of the trade union movement. We need to encourage activists back into the unions. And when they're there, we need to be making sure that they are pushing the trade union leaderships to have a serious fighting strategy. And the Socialist Party's core demand of where we go next is we say to the government, if you do not leave our pensions alone, we are coming out again, and we're coming out for twice as long. We need a 48-hour public sector general strike to follow on from what is going to be a huge day on November the 30th.
We're going to show our power. We're going to show the ruling class and the government that represents them. We're not going to stand for this. We're going to show our power. And if they don't listen, we may go after on for a more profound movement.
So one of the biggest cuts that the Tory Liberal Democrat government are making to public services is in the local authorities. Eric Pickles is planning to make 26% cuts in the local authority budget. Here in Brighton and Hove, that's going to mean a £43 million cut from the funding from government over 3 years. Over the next year, £20 million worth of savings or cuts are going to be made. The Green Council has started a series of consultations with council workers, with people in the local community, basically to ask where they want the cuts to take place. We as the Socialist Party and the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition think that a campaign needs to be waged for a needs budget, for a budget that reflects the needs of people in the city and not what the government wants to cut. We think that a campaign needs to be waged to demand that the funding that is currently being robbed from the city in order to pay back the bankers, the speculators, big business, those who caused the crisis, a campaign needs to be waged in order to have that funding returned back to the city, to avoid the need for cuts and to challenge this government.
Why should the workers pay for the crisis? Vote for a socialist alternative. Hello to you. Are you going to vote for?
Just before the general election, we, along with leading members of the Railway Union, the PCS, the Civil Servants, Prison Officers Association, as well as other socialist organisations, set up the Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition. This is the beginnings of a party that we think is needed as a response to the main three parties, the Tories, the Liberal Democrats and New Labour, who all agree that cuts have to take place in their opinion, but they just disagree about the speed with which they are made. We disagree with that. We don't think that is correct. We think that no cuts need to take place, but we also think that we need to build a mass workers' party, a new mass workers' party that is actually worth voting for and will lead a fight back against the cuts.
In opposing cuts, and all cuts as we do, it's absolutely right that we fight every single time, but also in the Socialist Party we recognise that it's not just about opposing and fighting against cuts into jobs and services, but understanding and recognising where that comes from.
These attacks have been taking place for many years now. Under New Labour, we had long hours, we had low wages, 2 to 3 part-time jobs, the selling off of public services, the cutting of funding, too many public services. Tony Blair, the Prime Minister at the time, famously said, we're all middle class now, that our lives were just getting better and better. However, that boom was based on attacks on working class people. Now we have the financial and economic crisis, which has bled through the world system and obviously hit Britain as hard as anywhere else. The government's responded, bailing out the banks, handing over massive amounts of money to those who caused the problem in the first place. Those debts then have been passed on to working class people, to the unemployed, to the poor, and so on. And we're now being made to pay the price for the bankers' crisis. However, as many people have pointed out, it's not necessary to make these cuts in order to get rid of the deficit. There is, for example, up to £120 billion worth of unpaid tax that is either evaded or avoided, mainly by the rich within society. There's the cost of maintaining Trident, as well as the war in Afghanistan and many other areas where there's wealth within society, but the priority is backing up the rich instead of ordinary people. However, we're very clear that these attacks that are taking place are part and parcel of the profit system. It's an attempt to drive down the wages of working class people in order to boost the profits of the super rich. So as far as we're concerned, it's not just about opposing the cuts, but opposing the very system that makes those cuts, in their eyes, inevitable and necessary. Our alternative is to take into democratic public ownership the banks, but also the key sections of the economy, and to run them in accordance with the needs of people within society, not according to the profit motives of big business and of capitalism. There's, for example, the 1,000 richest people in Britain own between them £400 billion. That's a massive amount of wealth, but also the resources that it represents that could be used in order to build houses, to properly invest in public services, to create jobs, in order to satisfy the needs of ordinary people. In Britain, across Europe and around the world, it is necessary to get rid of the profit system, replace it with a democratic form of socialism, and that is what we fight for as the Socialist Party. If you agree with us, join us and help us in that struggle.